Hey, everyone deals with that nagging voice in their head. It's that voice that tells you to worry, to be anxious, or that you can't do what God's called you to. This inner critic keeps us from the most abundant life that God has for us. But the question is, how should we deal with this nagging voice inside that can ruin our lives if left unchecked? Let's talk about it.
You're listening to Above Reproach Church Podcast, a podcast created for the local church. Our goal is to tackle tough church issues through thoughtful conversations like the one you're about to hear. Whether you're a church leader or a layperson, we pray this episode empowers you to play your role within the global, timeless family of God. This is Above Reproach Church Podcast.
It's clobbering time, Tanner. Talking about the inner critic that wants to clobber us, but we're going to clobber it just like the thing.
Wow.
Can you describe what the inner critic is in a way that the listener could understand?
Gracious, we're just jumping
and
right
then
into this.
I want you to give me an example of the inner critic in your actual life and how that's played out for you.
Holy cow. We're going
right into it because people are wondering what the heck's the inner critic.
I just went, okay, I'm going to give context to why I am acting
the
this way.
clobbering time?
Yes.
Yeah, let them know. I don't care.
We pray before our podcast, and we do. We're super holy. And as I was praying, Jason decides he wanted to give quote unquote background music, and clicked the wrong button on his.
I wanted it to be a prayer
soundboard, and it played. It's clobbering time.
Clobbering time from the Andy Stanley episode.
Well, I was like, Lord, let's pray that you would guide us today, that you would be in between.
It's clobbering time. Oh no, that's wrong button. I was trying to give him some soaking music. Dang it.
You gotta love the.
Describe what the inner critic is for the listener. How would you describe it, at least? I'm sure we'll come to an agreement.
Yeah, in my mind, it's your own self battling against yourself.
It's your self-perception of yourself?
Yeah. I would say it's
your self-evaluation of yourself?
Yeah. But it's more so the negative side of yourself, analyzing yourself in a negative way. Mm-hmm. I think it's more so an attack on yourself. That's something that it talks about in 1 Peter 2, the sin that wages war against your soul. I think... we have a little list right here. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, it's comparison. It's assuming what people are thinking about you.
Drawing thought bubbles around or over people's heads.
Right. It's crippling. It damages you. Damages your faith walk.
Would you say it's emotional damage?
Emotional damage.
Emotional damage.
It's being discontent and you're not satisfied. You're not satisfied with yourself. You're not satisfied with your performance. You're not satisfied with your looks, your life, your appearance, all that different stuff. It's always present.
That's right.
It's something that we can either, feed into, that we can produce in us, right? If you're somebody that's walked in insecurity for a long time, I mean, that's what it is. Really, that's the root of it. That's the root of it, right? I mean, that's the root of, the inner critic is that insecurity. And if you've been walking in that for years, right, as somebody, who might be dealing with insecurity, it's always growing and it's always trying to attack your soft spots.
It's rooted in like this desire for approval.
Yeah.
And to be wanted and loved and known and liked. And
it's overcritical. It's trying to point out every single flaw. You and I were just talking. There's something that
every detail, man,
that I'm doing that I'm really critical of, and I was listening to myself and the way that I sound, or the way that I appear, and I was
Is this the opera album you're working on?
Yeah, the opera album. Super.
You can tell them what you do. Go ahead, tell them.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't want to necessarily point it out, but I make music. It's the inner critic in me. I make music, and I got my songs back from my audio engineer who I've been working with. Shout out to a.r.c. It's been...
You can't do that. He has to pay to be on here.
Sorry. He's the sponsor for today's episode, right? And I was listening to myself and I was pointing out every little flaw that I might have heard. And I think that's where that inner critic was coming out, because then I woke up this morning after listening to it last night and I was like, why did I react that way? Like, I don't understand why I was reacting that way. So it grows, it's overcritical, it points out, at random, it points all the time in all situations for no reason. It's a lot of different things, but
this part too is that it's present in failure and success.
Yeah.
Like it minimizes the success you have and it magnifies failure. Or when it does magnify your success and make it big, it gives you a big head. It makes you feel bigger than you are.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's probably a million different ways to explain the voice of the inner critic that you as the listener, you can probably recognize in your life.
Sure.
When that voice is speaking a little too loud, you can recognize that voice that you don't want to listen to, So how have you seen the inner critic play out in your personal life?
Yeah.
I'd say the most practical and most recent example for me is anytime that I get in front of the camera or share the message of Jesus at all, or preach the Gospels, just in my head the whole time. Sometimes, you know how you like warm up before a basketball game? I'm just going to go straight into a game. You're going to stretch. Sometimes I feel like I need that stretching mentally and emotionally before I preach, and to get the jitters out instead of on camera the first 5-10 minutes, to work through all those jitters and the anxieties and the fears that are bombarding me and the desire to please people, and that voice in my head that I'm trying to get over and ignore so I can think clearly and speak the scriptures. Sometimes I wish, maybe I'll start doing that, is maybe like the first 10 minutes of my live stream, unofficially, I'll turn my camera on, talk through it, so that when I go live, all that stuff is worked out. But for me, it's the voice as I'm explaining the sermon for today, or as I'm getting into the scriptures. It's that voice that says, like, I don't know, brings up your failures from the past week, or how you were a bad husband, or how you shouldn't have fill in the blank, or how you're not capable of doing this and you're not qualified. There are people who are way more educated, way smarter, way more spiritual, way more holy. And then all these, you start getting in your head like, maybe I'm not supposed to be a teacher. All that's happening in like a matter of 5 seconds as I'm trying to start my sermon. So that's a practical example of for me, of that voice being hypercritical of everything I say from the Bible or teach according to the scriptures, which is fine. I think at least in some sense you should be discerning and thoughtful. But when you obsess over every detail, and I'm no longer thinking through what I'm saying or thinking about the person on the other side, now I'm thinking about what I'm thinking about myself, and I'm in my head. And it's hard to get out of that trap. But once you recognize you're in it, then you can start to climb out of it, which is half the battle, is recognizing that you're in that spiral. We should call it a spiral. Yeah, because it sucks you down like a turd in a toilet. Just sorry, what else are you gonna use, man? It sucks you down.
Whirlwind or
whirlwinds suck up though. I guess if the wind is coming from the bottom.
What is it called? It's the little. It looks like a toilet.
Whirlpool.
Thank you. That's what I was. Not a whirlwind.
Technically, that's like flushing a toilet. It's the whirlpool's happening.
I went to Bible college.
I went to not Bible college. I was gonna say turd college. So give us an example of what you think. How you've seen this play out in your life, where you've learned to recognize that, or when it creeps up. Is it when you make music, when you play basketball, when you're at home from work?
For me, it's everything. Yeah.
Jeez.
We just got really deep.
I'm over here like that doesn't happen for me. Yeah. When I'm showering, I'm thinking about how bad I'm showering. What a slob I am.
Why do I only shower once a week? I don't know.
Why am I a failure? Did I scrub that well? No, I'm an idiot. Stuff like that. It's like, can I just enjoy a shower?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that is a good point though. It does come out the most random of times. And I think for me, I've dealt with insecurities. That's like my whole life. I've just, dealt with it. It's been a huge battle in my life. And, I think it's in all aspects, in all areas, but I think the part that hits me the most is my physical appearance. Looking in the mirror sometimes is hard at days, and, putting on different clothes, and you're like, why doesn't this fit me the same as it did?
A bodybuilder would say the same thing too. Yeah. Like they talk about that actually, how as jacked as they are, and you're like, he has the body of a god. Like they talk about why they wear big clothes, because they don't like seeing themselves without a pump. And even when they do, they think, man, I'm like scrawny.
Yeah.
It's like, what? Dude,
Yeah.
you're 400 pounds of pure beefy muscle.
Yeah, or people that are skinny, they're
breathe
like,
and
why
I'd die.
can I, build muscle and things like that? And, it's everywhere. And I think for me, physical appearance has been one of the things that's attacked me the most in my life. And it's probably, it's been a root of, past experiences, right? For me, it was middle school.
Is there much
that I have to say other than just middle school? It just happened. It happened. That's where bad experiences happen.
Puberty,
and
bullying.
It's weird that something is, something that happened such a long time ago can affect you, right? There's things that you remember that, that people said, and it's like, I don't even really remember that season, but I do remember that one.
I don't even know their name.
Yeah, exactly. I don't
really impacted me.
I remember the face. I remember
Stupid
what they
Tommy.
said. Yeah. Dang it, Tommy.
I don't know any Tommies now that I think about it.
Either. No, Tommy's just a go-to word.
Something's wrong with the Green Power Ranger, Tommy.
Tommy.
He did die, though, so we probably shouldn't talk about him.
Rest in peace. Moment of silence for Tommy.
All right, back to it. What were you saying?
Yeah, it's performance, it's appearance, it's all those different things that, for me that I've really attacked myself. My inner critic has really, come at me hard with the, the different physical appearances and things like that. So,
yeah, I think you're hitting the nail on the head. And you as the listener, I'm sure you can definitely recognize that technically in every area of life, in every moment, there's the potential for that voice to really have that volume turned up. Because sometimes the volume's turned down and you're like, he's there, but he's really quiet right now.
Yeah.
Or she's there, that voice inside your head. Or sometimes it's turned up, max volume, like iMac speakers. It's annoying.
Let me ask you a question then. It just came to mind. This is going to be spontaneous on the spot. When have you felt...
Wait, I didn't say you could do it.
Sorry. Give me permission, please, sir.
Should I give him... Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. When have you noticed that the inner critic has been loudest in your life? What are those seasons of life like for you?
On the basketball court in high school.
Yeah.
When I'm around people whose opinion matters really like a lot to me.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm doing something that has eyes on me, or when I'm doing something that is going to be shared with people, whether it's a Facebook post or a video, thinking about this is going to be publicized and thinking about how someone will come along and critique or make fun or mock that. I guess all those different moments have more to... It's not usually when I'm behind the scenes. If it's behind the scenes, it's usually because I'm doing something someone else is going to see, and it has the opportunity to be critiqued.
Yeah.
And I don't like being critiqued.
Yeah.
Never have.
I think...
But yeah.
For me, what I was thinking about is, I think the moments where the volume on my inner critic is loudest is when I haven't been spending time with God.
Yeah. Is that the answer I was supposed to give?
No, it's not, because it was a personal application. But I've personally noticed, like, gosh, I just realized what you just said.
Did the inner critic come out?
Yeah,
oh, man. Usually he's quieter. Sorry about that.
But yeah, I've just noticed that, when I'm struggling the most in my physical appearance or my, performance and things like that, it's when I haven't been content in my season of life, and I've been seeking after things to give me contentment outside of God. And I think that's been one of the things that I've grown in, because I've realized that spending time with God usually, will always equivalate to me being more content in my
I think you made up a word, equivalate. I've never heard that word in my life. Now I want to look it up.
Equivalate. Crap.
Is it a word?
The inner critic's firing inside of me right now.
Don't say anything. Shut up.
It's equivalent. Sorry.
No, equivalate. That's a word that just became one. I'll put it in the dictionary. I'll pay money to put it in the dictionary. Oh my gosh.
It translates to...
I don't know.
What was I even trying to say?
I know what you were trying to say. I just can't think of the word that sums up what you're trying to say. Both are inner critics.
When I am spending time with God, it translates.
That's a good word.
Gosh, equivalates. I need to look that up after this episode now and see if that's actually a word. 'Cause it's probably not.
Sounds like it could be, like in Japan. But you're right. Like when we don't spend time with God, Jesus does say that a sheep will recognize my voice. So there's always like a bunch of voices competing for our attention. There's every moment of every day. Instagram's calling your name, TikTok, your kids, your wife, your boss, your own inner critic. I mean, the voice of God trying to get you to focus on what matters. There's always these bunch of voices competing for my attention. So we could tell people like, hey, learn to recognize that voice and then drown it out. But it's another thing to actually be able to drown it out and overcome that voice. So, as we transition to the segment of this where we talk about creating as content creators or whatever it is that you make, whatever art, whatever skill, whatever ability you have, think of your talents. Those are often the areas of the most insecurity. Is something that you are proud of, but you're not sure if someone else will be proud of it too. So when it comes to like stuff we put out, I'm not going to say content because people will just say, oh, that's just videos. But when it comes to things that we make and put out there, how do we create through that nagging voice in your head? How do we create past that? Because it's always going to be present. And like what you said is we need to spend time with God so that his voice is louder in my life, so that his voice has more of my attention and I recognize his voice quicker and easier. That's a good practical, step.
Yeah.
And when that happens, the voice of your inner critic, which is negative and shameful and condemning, it will be drowned out by the voice of God because you listen to the voice that you're most familiar with. So become more familiar with God's voice and not your own.
Yeah.
So how do you create past that stupid little voice that wants to shame and condemn and critique every detail and make you feel like a failure?
I think you have to remind yourself that you're not creating for that voice. You're creating for people that, you can impact. You're creating for the glory of God. And, whatever you're creating, whether it's an environment, for your kids as parents, whether you are creating, like me, you're creating music and or you're creating YouTube videos and things like that. Who are you trying to touch when you are creating those either environments or pieces of art or whatever it might be? It's not for that inner critic. That inner critic gets nothing out of what you create. It's actually the people that you're going to be, that will be surrounded by your art or by your creativity. And I think one of the things that's touched me recently is like, I personally, like, I don't like a lot of my old music. I critique it a lot actually. And which is something that we normally do anyways as creatives. We always look at our old, things
to
that
feel
we
better
created.
about where we are.
Yeah, right.
I hate my old sermons when I was like 20.
Yeah. I mean, you look back at your stuff and you're like, well, I've improved, and things like that. But it was kind of
cringy.
Steps towards where you're at now, right? But I've had people reach out to me and say, hey, I've been listening to your music, and I'm like, oh, the old stuff?
Not the old stuff.
Yeah, please, not the old stuff. And they still say, they're like, yeah, but I love it. And I'm like, I don't understand like how, but it's because we're not creating for our inner critic. We're creating for the people, the lives that we could touch, by what you're creating. So
what happens when the inner critic is trying to convince you of what your audience is going to think or say about your content? So then you're thinking about them, and your inner critic is trying to convince you they're going to think this, they're going to say this. This is how they're going to, think about your content you're putting out. They'll hate it.
Yeah.
They're going to rally against you, and they're going to disregard it. They're going to go, man, he lost his vibe, that kind of thing. How do you handle that kind of, like, it is still for them, but somehow that inner critic is stepping in between you and your audience to almost speak for them on their behalf. It's the whole drawing thought bubbles above people's heads. Just trying to ignore what's happening here. My son just burst into the room like nothing's happening. And there he is. Yep. And so, how do you deal with that voice?
Salem is like the inner voice that's in your head.
He just came and distracted me, man. That's a good example. Every other episode he comes in and he gives us a great example.
Somehow.
of spreading pink eye, or my son has pink eye right now and he's deciding to share it with everyone in the house. Like, that's a good example. Like, that voice just kind of out of nowhere, like, hey, pay attention to me. And you're like, what was I thinking about? What was I saying? Oh no, that happens to me when I preach, is I'm in the middle of a thought and then I lose that train of thought. And then within like a split second, the human brain is incredible. I'm thinking about what someone's thinking about me pausing, and then I'm thinking about how I don't know where to go from here and how do I look, all within a split second.
Yeah.
And then I lose my train of thought, you know? So how do you create through that? I guess I'll say it a different way. How do you do what God's called you to do through that? He's called you to serve in your church. He's called you to teach. He's called you to preach that message. He's called you to raise those kids. He's called you to be in that hospitality ministry. Or, you know, be a kindergarten teacher at that school. How do you effectively fulfill your calling through that dumb voice?
You just continue to do it. I think that's the best way that I personally can answer it, is because there's been times where I haven't wanted to finish a song. I haven't wanted to finish a sermon. I haven't wanted to, you know, have that conversation with that person that I'm discipling, you know, whatever it is. But when I do it, there's something about when you follow through with God's calling that actually encourages you, you know, through that discouragement that the inner critic is giving you. I think it just takes your personal desire to fulfill God's calling rather than to fulfill what that inner critic is saying. So rather than, you know, following through with what the inner critic is saying, I'm going to listen to what God says. And I think I just continue to do what I feel that I'm called to, rather than being distracted by the feelings that the inner critic is trying to bring to me.
Yeah, I'll just leave it there. I won't even add to that, because just keep doing it. We could go deep into that. Maybe we'll make a whole episode on how to do that. Second question about what we create or what we're doing for God. Is there a healthy way to compare your fill in the blank, whatever you're doing, your ministry, your parenting, your sermon, your preaching ability, whatever it is, your music? Is there a healthy way to compare what you're making and doing with what someone else is doing?
Yeah.
We think of comparison, and you said this earlier before we did the podcast, that comparison most often is negative, and so therefore we conclude comparison is always bad.
Yeah.
Not necessarily. Paul talks about how, like, imitate me as I imitate Christ. That's a healthy, biblical, Christ-centered comparison. You're not comparing to feel better than someone else.
Sure.
You're not comparing to have a bigger ego or to find value in what you're good at. You're comparing really to figure out where you can improve, how you can do it better next time, or what you can adjust and adapt from what someone else is doing. Maybe they're farther along in their music than you, and they've been doing it for like 10 plus years, and you're 2 years into it. You comparing can be negative if it's rooted in pride or insecurity, or, you know, that kind of thing. Or if it's self-centered. But if you're comparing, going, I actually want to learn how to do what I'm doing better. I also want to figure out how to adapt what they're doing in the way that I'm personally, or I'm trying to get to where they are, and learn from the example they've set. That's a fine thing to do. Jesus is our ultimate example in every area of life, in character, in heart, in mindset. We just want to be like him. So in that sense, we are comparing where we are now with where we want to be and who we want to be, so that we can recognize that gap and do what we need to close that gap. Same with music, same with basketball, same with, you know, whatever it is that you're creating or doing, parenting and ministry. Sometimes we're afraid to see how someone else might be farther along, or, you know, more skilled at what they're doing than we're currently, because we don't like admitting that I could go farther, or I'm not where I could be. We have this, at least for me, there's this mentality that says, I like to feel like the top dog. I like to feel like I've perfected my craft and there's no going past this. I'm an expert. But once someone knows more than me or is farther, dang, I'm not what I thought I was. And so now that means I have to grow and develop and sharpen. I just saw a post from Matt Chandler on Instagram saying he just graduated from
seminary,
or masters. And I thought, my guy's like, what, 50? And he just got his master's.
He's getting there.
Some people are getting their master's, at like 22, 24. And he's not, comparing, going, oh, I missed my shot. He's doing what he can where he is with what he has.
Yeah.
And I love that. It's just this desire to continue learning, to continue progressing, to continue developing.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any problem with that. Just please examine your motivation. Is it self-centered? I know I'm talking a lot. Is it all about you? Is it to magnify and show people you?
Yeah.
Or is it Christ-centered?
Yeah.
Something to think about.
Yeah, a couple of episodes ago, we talked about looking to get into different communities that will encourage and mature either your gift or your environments that you're creating or your creativity. It's just something that we talked about. And something that like came to mind for me is like, for a healthy comparison, is like when you are trying to get better at something, you usually look to the greats that did good in that thing. So for me, I adapted to basketball. Growing up as a kid, I watched clips of, the greatest athletes, right? The greatest, basketball players.
Tiger Woods.
Stop. I was ready for you to say like Rick Gannon or something like that. But
Rich Gannon, he's a good tennis player.
Stop it.
All the sports people right now
You're
are
so good at
losing their
right.
mind. Unsubscribe.
But when you're trying to get good at something, you watch the people that are best at doing that thing. And I think that helps you when you're a creative as well, or if you're a parent, right?
It motivates you.
You look at some of the best parents that you're surrounded by. That's why you surround yourself by them in the first place, right? You see how they have different, techniques and tactics in attacking certain situations or handling certain environments or moments or things like that. You put yourself in a place where you can learn and grow from people that are great at doing that thing so that you can make it your own. And that's what's so great about being a creative is, for you probably got inspiration from plenty of people. And then, you took pieces of what you like and then you adapt it to yourself. And that's something that, I've been told about in music is like, some of the best artists that now, they just pull from other artists that they like
and learn from the people who came before them.
Exactly.
Yep.
And I think that's an encouragement because not all comparison is negative. I can compare and contrast, right? And that's how I adapt things well in my creativity or, what I'm setting in my environments as parents or as a leader in a church group, things like that. I personally, like as a volunteer when I was in youth group, I took ideas and things that I learned from my other, youth counselors that I loved. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to adapt that because they did that so great. And it gave me so many great memories to remember and so many cool moments in our small group setting and things like that. You just take the best from the best people and then adapt it to yourself so that you can be better. And it's not necessarily like this is a way to better yourself. It's just so that you can take steps towards glorifying God in a better way.
In excellence.
Yeah.
I think we're afraid to find out that we're wrong or we're not as good as we think. And so, how do you recognize when comparison is healthy and good and Christ-centered and for his kingdom and glory, and it will promote growth, and when it's that voice of the inner critic? And I think when you're comparing and it shames you or it inflates your ego, either shame or pride is the result of that comparison, then you're either comparing with the wrong heart or for the wrong reason or the wrong thing. So you already kind of established, is all criticism bad? We live in a culture where people don't want to be criticized or, thoughtfully critiqued with good feedback. People don't want to figure out where they can get better. Everyone wants to be the perfect snowflake as they are with no reason to get better. You're perfect the way you are. You have no reason to develop anything you have or get any better. You are it, my guy. We live in a culture like that. And so when we talk about criticism, the mantra of our day is don't criticize me or you hate me. But not all criticism is bad. And I don't even believe that, now when I'm thinking about it, the inner voice that wants to critique every detail and shame you or inflate your ego, that inner voice is not always completely wrong. Sometimes there's something, an area where I know I need to improve. That's true. But the inner voice takes that and makes it something that I'm ashamed of.
Yeah.
Instead of a great opportunity to get better, instead of a new opportunity to learn from a new angle or explore this in a way I never have, and to walk with God into growth and development. So I think the inner critic takes, just like this, the devil does, he takes a grain of truth and then covers it with a bunch of muck so that you are ashamed or you have a big old inflated ego. But there's a grain of truth in that. Yeah, you can get better, or yeah, you are good at that. So, it's upon us to recognize that voice, overcome that voice, but also if there's a grain of truth, to bring that before the Lord and almost pull out, they say chew the meat and spit out the bones. That's kind of what we do with the inner voice of the critic. Is not everything is wrong. Sometimes, like, your worst enemy who hates your guts and wants you dead can say a true thing that you can learn from. And go, dang, you know what? I hate that guy and he hates me, but he just told me something true about myself that I need to adjust in my life. That's fine, So anything you want to say about that?
I don't know if this might make me sound crazy, but I mean, at least for me, the inner critic voice sounds very similar to the inner conviction voice, which is what you're kind of getting to, when that can either be used for good.
Read this question. That's what you're talking about. We didn't touch on it.
Did you just, wow, look at that. It says, how did you discern God's voice of correction and direction versus the inner voice of God, or of the critic? That's good.
Because God will correct you. God will critique what you do.
Yeah.
Not to shame you, but to show you there's more. To
but
help
it sounds
you become
the same,
better.
right?
It can.
Yeah. Which is why I think it's the tone of that voice that matters, right? And that's where we recognize, whether this voice that's within me, it's either attacking me or it's edifying me. And I think that's the part where we can defer, like which one is which, is because I can tell the tone and what it's directing me to. Is it directing me towards, shame and guilt and wanting me to put myself down and really dwell within those thoughts? Or is it trying to build me up in my character and grow me as a believer in my walk and, in my creativity and the environments that I'm setting? So either that voice can be something that builds you up or shoots you down and destructs you. So, destructs you.
Just like the equalizer.
Gosh, darn it.
Hey, but
demolishes you.
Hey, yeah, demolishes. Or you could say
breaks you down.
What did the thing say?
What did he say?
It's clobbering time.
Oh, it's clobbering.
It can clobber you.
It can clobber you.
That's a good place to do this. One of the things to consider is that the inner voice of the critic that spirals you down into shame or pride, and yes, pride actually brings you down. One of the things to think about is that sometimes that inner voice will cause us to misinterpret what God is saying or the heart with which he's saying it. So if God convicts me of something I just said to my wife, that's true, that's good. God wants to help me become better a husband.
Yeah.
But my inner voice will take that and shame me with it. Shame me with the truth. Use it to beat me down. And so we need to interpret, or we need to learn how to discern, not just between the voices, but even when I know God is speaking am I letting that inner critic or that inner voice disrupt the way that I receive what God is doing in me? Because that voice can stand in the way and almost like, become like a filter so that I'm hearing what God is not saying, or I'm receiving it the way that God did not intend for me to receive that.
Yeah.
And so that inner voice is hard to discern sometimes, because you go, oh, God told me this, but you don't even recognize that you're receiving that with pride, or you're receiving that with a shame, condemning kind of posture that makes you feel less than you are. And you're like, God hates me. And God's going, I love you so much. I wanted to show you that, to bring you into more life, abundant life. So, anything else you want to say about discerning God's voice, which he will correct? He will discipline and train and call out what's trash in your life to pull you out of that. And sometimes we'll go, oh, that's not God. And God's going, no, it is me. And you're going, shut up, inner critic. I'm not listening. And God's like, bro, you don't get it. I'm talking to you.
Yeah.
And then we will be like, the inner voice will almost like mix up the voices and say the inner voice is God and God's the inner voice. And it's hard.
This might be reaching a little bit, but I think the first thing
for the sky.
the first thing that came to mind was Jonah. When God's audible voice is actually like talking to him about leading him to Nineveh, and he wants to go. And Jonah's like, no,
Jonah.
Yeah. I think of that because Jonah heard the voice of God and yet still went to Tarshish, went the opposite direction. And I think it was the inner voice in Jonah that's like, this is only for us. Like, this is only for our people, not for these destructive, evil people in Nineveh. And I think that's often the bitterness in our heart. And I think the pride that gets to us, where even if we did hear God's voice, there's times where that inner voice just pulls us in another direction, where those two voices are battling against one another in our mind rather than prioritizing one over the other. And I think that's the part, again, like where I go back to what's the tone of the voice, even if it gets you out of your comfort zone, right? Like, even if God is calling you to something outside of your comfort zone, it's still something that he's calling you to, right? But that inner voice is going to battle right, next to God's voice and say, he's pulling you out of your comfort zone. Like, that's going to be weird. Like, people are going to think this about you. And it's like, well, God has called you to this thing. So why not just follow through with it? And I think it's because we've empowered that voice for too long. And
for years.
Yeah. And again, it goes back to what I was saying at the beginning of the episode, where it grows like that.
It's a monster, man.
The presence grows in us when you feed it, right? When you feed into it, when you give it power, that's when you can see a change and a transformation in your thinking, rather than, giving priority to God. You almost, even them out together, where you give both of them a say, rather than cutting it off.
Half my life goes to God, half my life goes to the inner voice.
The moment that I think maybe the inner voice is right is already a choice of walking away from what God's calling me to, because you're questioning what God is intentionally like saying to you.
They're competing.
So again, it all goes back to the root of it. What is the tone? Like, what is it trying to do? What is the action that it's driving you to, the direction that it's giving you? And I think that's how we start to discern that voice.
Which goes back to knowing the voice of God and his word, right?
Yeah.
And spend time in his word, you'll become familiar with his voice. And so in the next episode, what we'll talk about is when we find ourselves in local church communities, whatever communities we're in, even our household and our family, that inner voice can play a huge role in your relationships with other people and how well you function in relationship with people. And then we'll also talk about, being parents, being leaders, being creators, and not letting that inner voice, rule our lives and, just clown us like we often let it do. So I think this conversation's been helpful for those who are just wanting to learn. Romans chapter 12 keeps coming to mind, which is, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And when you have your mind transformed by the word of God, you can discern and recognize his will and his voice and his heart, so that this inner voice doesn't cripple you with discouragement and shame. I'll end with a small just example of what we mean by all this. Sometimes my son or my daughter, either one, they have a good attitude when I correct them. They have a good heart posture. They're receiving it well. Other times, when let's just say I tell my son, hey, let's not do that to Layla, and he interprets it as, I'm a failure, you hate me, and he says, don't talk to me, no one talk to me, and he shuts down and he goes and hides in a corner, he runs away, don't look at me. And somehow, like, that inner voice misinterpreted for him what I was saying. I just said, stop doing that. He, with a good heart, he would have said, my dad loves me, he cares about me and my sister. He's not saying I'm a terrible person. He's just correcting what I'm doing, and I should have made that change. Instead, sometimes he runs away, or Layla, or sometimes I'll do something nice for Layla, and he'll interpret that as, oh, you don't love me, you love her. And so there's this opportunity we have daily to not just hear the voice of God, but to correctly discern what he's saying and what he's doing in our life. So, I just encourage you as the listener throughout this week, to not just recognize when God is speaking and what he's saying, but watch your heart and the way you receive that. Think about the way you're approaching what he's saying and what you're thinking is his heart and his motive behind telling you that in his word, or, by his spirit, or getting counsel from other godly people. Sometimes God counsels us through people that we'd otherwise not want us to. And so just consider these things. Anything you want to say in closing, these final seconds?
I think the thing that comes to mind is just analyze yourself. Like, how much have you been feeding that inner critic, recently? Because that's not the voice of God. And I think the more that we do empower that voice, the more that we are actually like deafening ourselves to the voice of God. And because we're giving it power, and that's the only thing that we're, normalized to. And I think, looking at that, pray, get in time with Jesus and sit in prayer with him, so that you can hear that voice again and recognize it. Amen.
That's a good way to end. Go to visit abovereproachministry.com if you haven't already. We also, for those of you that care, we just released a completely free, all caps free, and Times New Roman 12-point font, completely free, brand new 40-day Bible study program online. You can take the smaller version of it. We have a 27-day, we have an 11-day. Just released that. Go check it out on our website for those of you that want to read the Bible. Learn how to read the Bible at your own pace. These programs, all the courses, all the resources we do here at Above Reproach Ministry is only possible because of generous supporters like you guys. So thank you guys. And next episode's going to be fire.
See ya.
Hey, thanks for listening to today's Above Reproach Church podcast. If you've benefited from this content or this ministry in any way, there are a number of ways you can support what we're doing to help people move towards Jesus. We're completely funded by generous supporters like you, so if you'd like to partner with us financially, you can head to abovereproachministry.com/donate, and you can give through debit or credit card, you can give through PayPal, Venmo, Patreon, or even just mail a check to P.O. Box 338, Green Cove Springs, Florida 32043. Or grab some of our church merch to represent Jesus on your body wherever you go. Either way, while you're on the website, check out all of our free resources, our online church, my book Fruitful, as well as everything else going on in our online ministry. Thanks for listening, and as always, keep moving towards Jesus.